Welcome to the Thrive Forever Fit Show, the podcast that's here to ignite your potential and guide you on a journey towards living your best life. I'm your host, Jay Nixon, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. On this show, we're passionate about one thing, and that's helping you reach your full potential, whether that's in your health and fitness, relationships, career, or personal growth. We're here to provide you with tools, strategies, and inspiration to thrive in every aspect of your life. Each episode will dive deep into topics that matter most, featuring insightful interviews with experts, thought leaders, and individuals who've achieved extraordinary success. Together, we're going to explore powerful mindset shifts, nutrition and fitness strategies, effective goal setting, mindfulness techniques, and much, much more. We'll break down the barriers that hold you back and help you build resilience, focus, and unwavering determination. So if you're ready to unleash your potential and embark on a transformative journey, this podcast is for you. It's time to embrace your inner fire, tap into your limitless capabilities, and make every day an opportunity for growth and self-improvement. Get ready to be inspired, motivated, and empowered to live the life you've always dreamed of. The Thrive Forever Fit Show is here to support you every step of the way. Let's dive in. Before we dive into the show, I want to take a quick moment to talk about the sponsor of this episode. It is very dear and near and close to my heart because it is Lori's company, SpaStar. If you ever had the opportunity to watch someone create something from a thought or a vision and make this magical thing actually come to life, well, then you'll know why I'm so extremely proud of her and why I'm so excited to have her sponsoring the Thrive Forever Fit Show. If you've listened to my podcast, then you probably heard her on episode 259. If you haven't heard that, I would go listen to episode 259 as soon as you finish this episode. She talks about the story of how she created it, the adversity she overcame, the challenges that she worked through, and just the inspirational story that I know you're absolutely going to love. But what SpaStar is a luxury wrap. And it was created as a spa wrap for people who were getting beauty treatments. But what we found out is it is a piece for everyday life. People are wearing it as swimsuit cover-ups, resort wear, just to get ready in the mornings or for that special event. It is the most unique piece. And I've actually worn this thing several times. I was the actual first model for this. Maybe I'll show you guys some photos of that when the time is right. But it is such a cool creation called the Get Ready Wrap by SpaStar. And because you're a listener, you get 15% off today because you support me. So just go to spastar.net, spastar.net, the word spa, the word star.net. And at the checkout, enter Thrive15, THRIVE 15, and you're going to get 15% off of your Get Ready wrap. So many of my clients already have these and absolutely love them. We're selling them all over the country and all over the world, for that matter, to high-end luxury spas and to people just like you that are using them inside of their own homes. They're traveling with them. They're using them at the pool. It's so really just unbelievably cool to see and witness. And I'm so blessed to be a part of it. And I'm so blessed to have Lori actually sponsoring my podcast, which I think is really, really cool. So go check out SpaStar. I know you're going to love it. It is the coolest thing ever. And guys, this isn't just for ladies. This is one of the coolest gifts you could get any female in your life, for that matter. If Lori hadn't have created it, I would buy them for her as a gift to show her my love and appreciation. So dudes, if you're listening and you need to get a gift for your significant other or some special person in your life, go to spastar.net, grab a Get Ready wrap. There's all kinds of colors. There's black, there's sage, there's a berry color, there's a gosh, I just went blank. There's a kind of a greeny, kind of avocado-y color. Really cool. You're definitely going to love these, I promise. So go to spastar.net, check it out, support Lori. And Lori, thank you for sponsoring the show. All right, let's get to the action. You guys know I love high-level, outstanding, abundance-driven conversations. And so today's episode is going to be something that you're going to love as well. My guy, Nick Hutchison, is on today's show. Nick is the creator of Book Thinkers. So you can go to bookthinkers.com. He's also coming out with a brand new book called Rise of the Reader. Listen to the episode between Nick and I today. And if you like books, even if you don't like books, if you're anything like me and you couldn't read when you were in the third grade, this episode is still for you. You are absolutely going to love Nick's energy. You're going to love his inspiration, his motivation. He's just a really cool guy who gets it, and he's here to help you get more out of the books that you're reading. And if you're not a reader, you don't identify as a reader right now, he's going to help you learn how you can do that simply, and how you can make reading a part of your life that is going to actually be a needle mover for you. And you guys know that's why we're here. We're here to move the needle. We're here to get better. We're here to get the life that we deserve to live. All right, listen to this episode. Tell me how much you love it. Go buy Nick's book. Go to Amazon.com right now. Hit pause. Go buy Rise of the Reader. All right, love you guys. Enjoy the episode. Nick, welcome to the show, brother. How you doing?
Jay, I am excited to be here. I had a chance to listen to a little bit of one of your episodes recently, and I just feel like we're very aligned in the way that we think about the world. So I can't wait to share some of my favorite reading tips with your audience.
Love that. And so I'm a big book guy, like we were talking about before. You know, we kicked off. I've written 2 books. A bunch of all my friends have written books. Like, it's kind of just a thing. But books, why? I mean, I get it, but like, why books? How books? Like, you know, have you always been a voracious reader? Was there one book that like flipped you over the edge? Was there one author? Like, how did you? And I know it's a big question, but like, how did you get into that? And then we'll kind of unpack it.
Yeah, let's dive in. So I was not much of a reader growing up. I mean, when I was younger teens, I read a couple fiction series and things like that, but I didn't read throughout high school. I didn't read throughout college. But going into my senior year of college, I took an internship at a local software company. It was a sales role, and I had about an hour commute each way. And very early into that experience, my boss recommended podcasting. So he said, hey, you have a bunch of time in the car. You have an hour commute each way. Listen to productive conversations. He said something along the lines of, listening to the same song for the 500th time isn't going to get you closer to your goals. Like, I could tell you're a motivated guy. Check out these podcasts. And so that's what I did. And so I'm listening to all this content about successful people. Shows just like this, where a host interviews a series of guests and they talk about what they did to become successful. And so many of them gave at least a little credit for their success to the books that they had read. And I think after the 15th time hearing Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I was like, okay, I should probably check out the book. Like, if I choose not to read the book, then I'm choosing to live under my potential. And I was just hooked, like right from day one, early 20s, decided to get Rich Dad, Poor Dad and a few other books. And the rest is history. Like, I fell head over heels in love with personal development and the entire industry.
That's so cool. I'm kind of the same way. That growing up, was not a reader. I was actually terrified to read. I was such a slow reader. I don't know if you ever did this, but I mean, I'm almost 50, so I'm probably got a few years on you. But they used to make us read out loud in class. And so they'd say,
I'm the same way.
Okay.
Read ahead. Yeah.
I would count. I'd be like, okay, I'm number 7. I'd count 7 paragraphs down. And I don't care what they were talking about. I was just reading my paragraph, and then I'd be like, so I could almost like memorize it, because I had such a fear of reading, and it was so weird. And yeah, so I mean, I was like, the thought that I would ever write a book, I'm like, are you kidding me? I could barely read. I'm a stooge.
Yeah, sorry to talk over you. I was just excited because I literally did the same thing. And I mean, I had a fear of, I had kind of like some social anxiety growing up. I wasn't very confident in my ability to communicate and articulate things, especially reading in front of a class. So I did the same thing. I'd zone everybody else out. I'd count. And the worst thing, I'm sure it happened to you too, the worst thing was when you miscounted, or the teacher said, why don't you read another paragraph to somebody else? So now you're totally off. Oh, it's the worst.
100% relatable. I mean, that was my life. I'm like, if she says, and so that would happen all the time. I'd be like, hey, that was so great. Go ahead and just read the next one. I'd be like, that's mine. Like, that's my jackpot. And so now I've got to hustle and read the next one. So that's funny. And you know what? Personal development for me was kind of the thing that pushed me over that as well. And I was 25 when I started kind of down my personal development journey. But before that, like, if you would have said, hey, Jay, like, have you read so-and-so book or whatever? I'd be like, nah, it's just not my jam. You know what I mean? I'm not a voracious reader. And even now I'm still not, quote unquote, a good reader. My wife makes fun of me because it takes me forever to actually read a book. But I'm an Audible learner, so I can listen to an audiobook on 2 times the speed, retain everything it said, and then be able to regurgitate it to you and be like, hey, on page 17 or chapter 13, you're going to love blah, 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 blah. But if I read it, nothing. Can't remember it. Takes me forever. So I'm kind of an Audible guy.
Yeah, I love audiobooks too. I'm in a I mean, I do this professionally, but I read about 100 books a year.
Yeah.
And when I say I read about 100 books a year, I probably read 60 to 70 physical paper books, and then I listen to 30 or 40 books a year. So
Yeah.
I'm a big Audible guy as well.
I saw one of the books on your Instagram, The Green Lights by McConaughey. And I'm like, if you don't listen to that, you're missing out. Like, read it too. But if you don't listen to it, you're missing out, because it's one
I
of those
agree.
that, like, I don't think it would have had the same effect on me if I would have just read it. Like, I had both, and it's kind of like sometimes what I'll do is I'll listen and read at the same time, because there's certain chapters that I kind of want to like dive deeper into, or maybe go back and like. My problem is when I'm reading, my brain goes to like, oh, I should write that down. And then I end up like journaling about the book instead of reading the book. And so it takes me like a year. But that McConaughey book is one of those that like you got to listen to, because it's like so amazing to hear him tell a story.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of vocal inflection and emotion, and he's a trained voice actor. So,
Yeah.
it's an audio experience, not an
Right.
audiobook. I listened to that actually when I was in Austin, Texas, is when the book came out. And I loved every single second of it. It's a great one.
Yeah, it's one of those you can't stop listening to, or probably can't put down even if you're reading it. Was there like a pivotal book? I mean, I know you mentioned Rich Dad Poor Dad, but it was like that was kind of the entree in. But has there been a book that was like, hey, because you think books, I mean, one of your beliefs is that books change lives, right? So was there a book that actually did that for you, that kind of got you moving in that direction? And I only asked that because there was one for me that actually flipped the switch.
Yeah, I feel like as a series of steps is sort of how I visualize it at different points in my life and my business. I've had different versions of what you're talking about. I mean, that first book for me was Rich Dad Poor Dad, because I went from a non-reader to a reader. Like, that was part of my identity after just one book. Because as I was reading that book, I became so excited about my future and about this idea that authors like Robert Kiyosaki condense decades of information into days of reading. And so I just felt like, I was a business student that couldn't talk about money. I went from back of the class, insecure and shy, to leading conversations on the subject after a book. And so I started to read about everything. I think the first book after Rich Dad Poor Dad that did that for me, and it's still one of my favorite books today, is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
Yeah.
So I was working a 9 to 5, had just graduated college, in a cubicle. And Tim says in that book, hey, you can design a life that's uniquely fulfilling to you. And he details his journey. He travels through all these different countries, builds a remote business. And I followed that book like it was the Bible almost. And I did everything that he recommended. I traveled internationally, embraced a ton of discomfort, built a business from behind a computer screen, automated, delegated, eliminated all of the low impact stuff that drained my energy so I could focus on the high impact stuff that brought me energy. Like, that book, I still use the principles today, about 8 years later after reading it. So the 4-Hour Workweek was really that book for me. What about you? What was that book?
That's the 4-Hour Workweek was a great book. That's kind of the first book that got me to believing and thinking, because like growing up in the generations that I did, like entrepreneurship was kind of unheard of. Especially I grew up in a really small town in Texas. It's like you get a job, you work that job forever. Maybe you get a gold watch, maybe some kind of pension or something. And so that was the first book that was like, hey man, like, and at the time I was like in the world of like pharmaceuticals and medical and nutritional supplements and things like that. And I'm like, I can do this my own way. Like, I don't have to just, it doesn't have to be a company car in a suit in a corner office and a title.
Yeah.
Like I can be as successful as I want to be. I think what I'm talking about now is the power of a book, right? It's like, it wasn't until I read that book. And one of the cool things about Tim is he's still living that today, right? Like you read so many things, like, and then the person's not who you thought they were going to be. It's like, he's everything that book still is today. And that was, I don't even know how many years ago. But the book that actually changed my life was when I was 25, I read Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Dr. Wayne Dyer. And that's what kind of got me into the whole personal development journey. I didn't even know what it was. I mean, this is back in like before the internet was ravenous with, every guru you could think of. And you actually had to go to Barnes and Noble. I know everybody listening is going to freak that out. Like you actually had to go buy books at stores. Like you couldn't have them delivered to your house. So it was a little more of a challenge. Like there wasn't courses online. So that book for me was like finding the Holy Grail. It was like, what? Like this thing up here can really dictate like how the rest of this life can go. And so I had a really fixed mindset before I read that. And it's like the first thing that kind of started me thinking differently. And so that was game changer for me.
Yeah, I haven't read that book yet, but somebody on my team read it earlier this year and it
Yeah.
instantly became his all-time favorite book. So
Yeah.
it's on my list. I have a copy. I know I need to read the book,
Yeah.
but I'm happy to, that's it's another person sort of in my life now recommending it.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. It's like it just got me simply to think differently, right? I started changing the way I thought about the little things in life, and then that changed the bigger things and the bigger things and the bigger things. So yeah, it was epiphanal for me, and that's kind of what kicked the rock down the road for me to start like exploring personal development. After I read that book, I started like trying to find people. Like I'm looking around, like, is there a mentor out there? Is there somebody I can follow? Is there somebody I can do anything? I remember I went to my first like personal development seminar, if you will, like 500 people in the room, like a couple of years after I read that book. And it was like, what is going on? Like it was a whole world I didn't even know about. You know what I mean? So I think that's another way that books kind of open up your eyes to things that you may not even be privy to. So uber powerful. How old were you when you read Rich Dad Poor Dad?
20 or 20. Yeah, I was 20 years old.
20. Yeah, that's so awesome. That's
yeah,
so
and I'm 29 years old now, so it's about 10 years of reading, and I've read about 500 books now, which is pretty crazy.
That's so cool. I want to ask you a question because you strike me, and obviously you're the kind of guy who reads a book and then just based on the way that you regurgitated the steps in Ferris's book, that you actually implement the knowledge that you're gaining from a book. So one of my pet peeves is people ask me all the time, Jay, what book should I read next? And I'm like, that's a great question. Tell me what book you just read. And they'll always give me a book, whatever, the new, it's a bestseller, usually something hot off the presses. And I'm like, I said, awesome, great book. Tell me 2 things you got from that book that you're actively doing right now. Like maybe you changed something, maybe you're doing something differently, you're thinking differently, you got a different habit. 97.6% of the time, this is what I get. Huh? What? I'm like, what? Like the book, like you read it, you said it was awesome, right? You're like, oh, it was a great book, awesome book. I'm like, well, what are you doing? Right. So how do you get away from that? And do you find that as well?
Yes, I find that as well. The book that I'm putting out November 1st, Rise of the Reader, Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn. So that's also my pet peeve. And the entire book is full of strategies on how to turn information into action. Because like we just highlighted, I didn't start reading books. In fact, I was against reading books until I was 20 years old. I'm 29 years old now, and I literally have designed what I consider to be my dream life. I'm living it in the present moment today, less than 10 years later, as a result of implementing information. So just like you, I kind of have a funny example where I say, oftentimes I'll meet somebody at a conference or talking to somebody on a Zoom call, and I'll say, what are you reading? And they'll tell me, and I'll say, why? Yeah. And they'll say, what do you mean, why? Yeah. So I'll share with you one of the tips from my book. And this is something that, and then I'll kind of go back into how I developed some of these techniques. Yeah. But I just did a little unboxing thing for Instagram. So I haven't actually read any of these books that are next to me yet. But this book is called Amazon Ads for Authors. And so what I like to do is I like to set an intention for each book that I read. And the intention, the goal for the book should follow the SMART goal framework. So I'll make one up for this one right now. I would say something like find and implement at least 2 Amazon advertising strategies for my book by the end of next week. And so as I'm reading through the book and I reread that intention every time I jump in, I'm filtering for those 2 things that I can implement by the end of next week so that I'll have better Amazon advertising or whatever. Yeah. Now that's specific. It's measurable. Like it's 2. I'll know if I hit it or not. It's attainable. It's actionable. It's relevant to my life. Obviously, I'm putting out a book. And I'm going to write it on the inside cover so that my brain can filter for the information each and every time I read. And it's time bound. Like I want to implement these and test them out by the end of next week. If you can add because, it gets a little bit more spicy. You can tie some emotion to it. You're far more likely to take action. And so I like to say intention-free reading, like reading without intention, is sort of a toxic behavior because like you're talking about, it leads to, okay, yeah, I'm excited, I'm entertained, but you're not changing any behavior. So that was kind of a long answer, but I think you have to set a SMART goal and then measure your activity to know whether or not a book is effective for you. And I started doing this. Is kind of funny because that internship where the sales guy told me to start podcasting, I joined them after school as a full-time employee. I worked in the world of sales for a while before Book Thinkers became a full-time thing. And what was so funny, and I only realized this in hindsight, was that each and every time I sold a software package to another business, they'd go through an implementation phase. And the implementation phase would last anywhere between a few weeks to a few months. So if you didn't go through that phase, you just bought the software and you tried to start using it, like it wouldn't work. You had to study, go through the course material, meet with the trainers. You needed to like go through the help files. And so that process took months most of the time. And I think I don't know, like I just kind of naturally applied that framework to the books that I was reading.
Yeah, that's awesome. It got me thinking, like I have this another theory. I call it the personal development vortex, right? Because in the world we live in now, I mean, you're kind of in the same world. It's like you can drink from a fire hose if you want to. You can go to a seminar every weekend. You can walk on water, walk on fire, you can walk on anything you want, right? People go to those, and then Monday rolls around, and then nothing happens, right? It's like, and so I call that the vortex, because you will see and or hear about the same people. Like, I mean, they'll go to like 27 of these in an entire year. It's the same concept with the book. I'll always have the conversation, be like, well, what's changed? And I think part of the problem is they've drank from a fire hose, and they've got so much information that there's no way, because they don't put it in that smart funnel that you did, that they just don't do anything, and they actually get more stuck than they were before they even started. And so I think it's important that you are writing this book, which is amazing, which it sounds to me like could be really used in any area of learning and or personal development in life, where you can really take some things away from some things. It's like I tell people when they go to a seminar, if it's a 3-day seminar, like you said, what are 2 things that you're going to get out of that seminar? I don't care if there's 27 speakers, just find 2 things, because you're not going to be able to implement everything you hear.
Yeah. And I think even at a conference, you should set an intention related to a problem that you're currently facing or a skill set that you want to develop. Because if you review that intention every time a speaker steps on stage, and your goal is, I want to find and implement 2 strategies for better communication by the end of the 3rd day. Now you're filtering for strategies for communication. It's relevant to a problem that you're currently facing. And yeah, you're far more likely to get more out of it. I have a sort of like a business coach. His name's Kevin Horsley. He wrote a book called Unlimited Memory. And he has a TED Talk where he says to the audience, raise your hand if you've read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And every hand in the audience goes up. And he says something like, keep your hand up if you can name all 7 habits. And every hand goes down. And then he says, what's the point of reading or learning anything if you can't even retain the simplest frameworks from the book? And so just like you're saying, like, I'm happy we're sort of cut from the same cloth, man, because yeah, it annoys me when people read these books and then it becomes like shelf help instead of self-help. It's like, no, you need, unless you actually implement something and change your behavior, it's a form of entertainment, not education. I really believe that.
Yeah. Well, and as somebody who wants other people to win, like that's my sole goal as a coach and as a mentor and even as a gym owner and all the things I do, my core desire is to see people win, whatever aspect that's in. And I think the problem that we're both talking about is doing all those things, reading all the books, going to the seminars, taking the courses, doing all that stuff. Without implementation, you're really it's going to end up being a net negative for you. And then you're going to say the statement, well, I'm stuck, or I'm frustrated, or I'm this, and nothing works for me, even though you've read 50 books this year. you just haven't implemented any of the strategy. So again, goes back to your book. Like I'm super pumped to get my hands on this so that I can articulate your strategies to people who ask me that question. So my next statement will be this: Jay, what book should I read? And when I ask them my follow-up question, they can't answer it, then I get to recommend your book. So it's a win-win-win.
Yeah, no, listen, I really appreciate that. And I think the entire kind of motivation for my mission is that books solved a lot of major problems in my life, and I know how transformative they can be. Unfortunately, so many people are unfulfilled. They're unhealthy, they're unfortunately unwealthy, right? They're poor or struggling with money, and they're not happy, they're not fulfilled. And it's like, I've solved selectively all of these problems step by step by step by reading books from the healthiest, the wealthiest, and the happiest people on the planet, and just implementing what they talk about. And so, a good book is $20, and it only takes a handful of hours to read, and then maybe a handful of hours to implement. And you could solve one of life's major problems that way.
Yeah.
Like, we try to overcomplicate it. And so, yeah, I believe the right book at the right time can change somebody's life.
That's a good segue, because my next question was going to be, how do you determine when the right book is and what the right time is? Is it like, what's your process? And then we can kind of maybe, adjunct a little bit and see like what would be a good process for somebody who's really not a functional focused reader. They're more of I read for sport, but I would like to make me change my life.
Yeah. Well, when I'm deciding on the next book that I'd like to read, there's sort of two buckets that I like to start with. Number one is there a problem that I'm currently experiencing that's causing a lot of pain or a lot of frustration that's holding me back? And if there is, I'll read a book about how to navigate that problem or try to find a potential solution. The other thing is skill set. Like, I believe we're all capable of doing more than we're currently doing today in terms of how big and how bold our lives can be. And so what skill sets are holding you back? Could you become a more effective communicator? Do you need to negotiate more effectively? Whatever the skill set is. So I like to start with those two buckets. When people reach out to me, I like to say, what's a major problem in your life holding you back? Let's start there. Because if it's tied to an emotional issue that you're dealing with on a daily basis, it could be related to your business, your personal life, your health, your personal finances, whatever it is, you'll be more motivated to finish that book and implement what you learn, especially if you build an intention around the book. So that's kind of how I like to think about it. On top of that, I do read a lot of the books that are popular, especially books that have been popular for a long time. If they've stood the test of time, that they're popular for a reason. Cliches are cliches for a reason. So these books tend to help a lot of people. And I just like to understand why they've been successful. I also read in anticipation of events that I'm attending. So if I'm attending an event where there will be a speaker, I love to get some background knowledge, sort of like build a base of understanding so that I can get more out of their talks. Those are typically the places that I start.
That's smart. Really smart. What do you say to somebody, like, let's just say a guy on your team or somebody on your team, comes to you with an issue and they're like, hey, Nick, I'm dealing with this. Like, what book would you recommend? And you're like, oh, well, this book, book XYZ. And they're like, oh, I already read that one. Like, how do you handle a situation like that? If you've read the book and that the person, there's steps in there, like, okay, what's that conversation look like?
Yeah, I'll sometimes remind people that I read books. Sometimes I've read some books 10 times.
Yeah, me too.
And that's because each time you read the book, you'll understand it a little bit more, and you'll find another example or a different reference point or a different perspective that you can use to implement. And I suppose in the example that you gave, I'd act as an accountability partner. I'd say, let's build this intention for your next read together. And let me hold you accountable to taking action on some of the things that you've learned, which is not a service or anything I offer people. Right. But I think one of the subjects that I do teach in the book is building an accountability group. Because if other people, owning a gym, you kind of understand that if somebody has a gym partner waiting for them at 7, they're less likely to press snooze because they're being held accountable by an external party. And I've had a weekly accountability group that I've met with every Friday for years. And I show up and they're going to hold me accountable to the goals that I set last week during our call. And so if I told them, hey, I read this cool book on Amazon ads and I'm looking to get 2 actionable takeaways from it, and then I show up and I don't have anything, I mean, they're gonna, I'd feel guilty or whatever. So it's just a little bit of added accountability. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of those books for me that I've read multiple times was Think and Grow Rich. I remember the first time I read it, I was like, okay, I think I think I get it, right? And then as I've read it several times, like as I've gotten better, the book becomes more relatable. You know what I mean? Like the first time you read a book like that, it's kind of like the idea or the thought that you're going to just like, oh, I'm different, like, right? And you're going to just like be that next level version of yourself is probably a little silly. But I think if you go back to those books like that and you revisit them, they can really be powerful and they almost kind of grow with you as you grow.
Oh yeah, they definitely do. One of my favorite quotes is from Napoleon Hill, and it's related to this topic. He says, action is the real measure of intelligence. Action,
Yeah.
not this like idea of sitting back and debating things from a philosophy perspective, but taking action. That's the real measure of intelligence. And so, yeah, Think and Grow Rich is a great book.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of my favorites. Like if you made me pick 10 books that like were transformative in my like, personal development journey, it would definitely be in there somewhere at some way, shape, or form. What are some of your favorite books of all time? Like say somebody's listening right now and they're like, hey, I'm into personal development, I'm into success, I'm into like wanting to be better, like, but I don't read. I don't even know where to start, right? And if you don't know where to start, sometimes, especially with books, like it can be overwhelming because I mean, if we've all been to a bookstore and now with the online bookstore, it's like, how do I pick? So what were some books you'd recommend?
I'll start with a quick example, something that I've been known to say a few times. So if somebody tells me they're not a reader, so if anybody listening today is not a reader, answer the following question. If I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of next week, could you do it? Recently, I asked that question to my, I asked that question to my audience recently, and somebody said, like, I'll read 10 books.
Yeah.
So it's just funny because if you say yes to that, but you're not a reader, it's because you value the $10,000, but you don't value the book without the $10,000. So it's a matter of perspective. And if you actually believe these books can create a real difference for you. So I'll start my answer to your question with a book that I read last year. It's a business book. So this is a business book recommendation. It's called $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozy. Amazing book. I went through that. And by the way, Alex writes at like a 3rd or 5th grade reading level. So he takes these complex business subjects. Anybody can read them. And so I was going through the book last year. I was going through all the examples and the exercises. And I developed a new service for my business using his frameworks that I thought, oh, wow, this is a no-brainer. Let me try to offer it to some people. And it literally tripled the size of my business. A book, a $20 book, tripled the size of my business, added over 6 figures of revenue in a matter of just a few months. That's the power of what a book can do. So $10,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars, like it can actually happen that way.
Let me pause you really quick because I want to validate what you just said. I did the exact same thing that you did. Same book. I did the audio version and the written version at the same time, like he recommends that you do.
Basically, me too. Yeah.
You learn double. And I did the same thing. I created some new verticals. I created some new layers of my business that have been unbelievably phenomenal. And like you said, I appreciate the fact that he writes at a 3rd grade level because it allows you to ingest it and be like, okay, now I can like use this. And this is one of my problems with the book is like, I have trouble getting through it because I want to do this with everything. I want to like, how can I use this right now? And I did the same thing you did. So just validation to anybody who's listening that this isn't just a one-off that Nick like is, figured out. Like I'm not even very smart, guys. And I did the exact same thing Nick did. So anybody can do that. That's so genius on your part, brother.
Yeah, me neither, by the way, Jay. Like, I'm not the smartest, I'm not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree, but I can read a book and I can follow instructions.
Yeah.
And Alex makes it very easy. And his newest book, $100 Million Leads, just came out. I've only listened to the audio version so far. I'm waiting for the physical book to come to implement it. But yeah, man, I'll make a more general recommendation for everybody. This was a book I read very early in my reading career. And I think it's a very easy book to read. It's called The Go-Giver. Have you read it, Jay?
I have not.
The Go-Giver. It's a business parable, actually. So it's written in a fiction format, and it's a very short book. It's by Bob Berg and John David Mann. And it teaches main lessons. I'll just share one as an intro. It teaches you the reciprocal relationship between giving and receiving. So I think so many of us early in our lives were like go-getters, like take, 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 take. And then we shift to a place of impact. I know I did. And I started to give, 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 give. But there's actually a reciprocal relationship between both of them, because the more you give, the more you'll be able to receive in life. The more you receive, the more you'll have to give. And that cycle can continue. And the book teaches that lesson to you in a very gentle, kind, easy way. The book has very easy language to read. It's a short book. It's a fun, kind of friendly story. And so for people that are new to the personal development space, I think that's a great place to start.
Awesome. I just wrote it down. I'm going to grab it. That's really cool.
Yeah, I love the book, and it's sold over 1 million copies. Like it's done pretty well for itself, but I don't hear it talked about that much. So that's why I like to make the recommendation.
That's a pretty good indicator. Anything that's sold over 1 million copies, you can probably think I'm spending my money in a decent place. It's not going to be poor, not going to be horrible. I'm going to get something from it. Well, what got you? I mean, so you started almost 9 years ago, close to 10 years ago, reading. When did you get to the place where you're like, okay, like I need to write my book? Like, how am I going to start this process?
So there's probably a step in between, which is worth mentioning to the audience to make everything pretty clear. I started sharing the books that I was reading on social media as a little bit of a side hustle. I had no original intention other than connecting with like-minded people, maybe monetizing that by releasing a mobile application or something, which never came to be. But as the audience started to grow and I started to connect with more like-minded people, eventually authors started to reach out and say, hey, Nick, like your audience is a good fit for my book. I'd love to pay you for a book review. And so that was sort of the original form of monetization. I was being paid to read books that I was originally reading for free. And then I was more incentivized to sort of grow the audience. Now, here's the answer to your question. As I continued to grow the audience, people would reach out to me and I documented everything, the travel that I was doing, the people that I was hanging out with. Like we just interviewed Alex Hormozy and it was an amazing interview. So like working with these types of people, and everybody, a lot of people, hundreds over the years would reach out and say, hey, Nick, I see you're reading and implementing all this amazing material. I'm having a tough time implementing the material. I get excited, but it's hard to take action. Like, what am I missing? And so I would do my best to answer everybody. I'd send voice notes or I'd jump on a quick Zoom call. I'd type things out, but I always felt like I was underserving those people because of two things. Number one, I wasn't capable of through those mediums of giving everybody like a proper answer. And so I felt like I was underserving them. But then number two, like I wasn't even really sure what I was doing. So I decided to write the book, and that forced me almost from like a third party perspective to observe my own behavior and to document it so that I could teach it to other people. Like, what's the step-by-step process of effectively reading a book? How do you take effective notes? What's the difference between reading and note-taking? What do you do with your notes once you're done? How do you retain them? How do you implement them? What was I doing? The accountability groups and the activity trackers and everything. So yeah, it took me a couple of years actually of just observing my own behavior and then trying to put pen to paper and make it work. And so that was the original need. It's like, I knew the 20-year-old version of myself could have saved a lot of time. Like I wasted reading a lot of books without taking action before I figured out how to do it. And so that's why I decided to write the book.
Love that. Yeah, my first one took me about 2 years. Once I got the idea, like I had the URL, the idea, everything for 2 years before I actually published the book, because I think your first time too, you want it to be good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You question yourself. I mean, you go through the whole, Stephen Pressfield, like the imposter syndrome thing. Like, finally you get to a place where you just have to ship it. Like, cause you could just really ruminate on it forever and never have it come out. How did you work through that? I've got a couple people in my audience that I know are actually writing their first books right now, and I know they're going to be listening to this. And I've given them kind of my perspective, but I'd love to hear that from somebody else who's as seasoned as you are with books, just in general. Like, what was your process like when you actually started putting pen to paper, or working through the chapters and the organization and stuff like that? How'd you do that?
Well, I'll admit that it was not as efficient as I wanted it to be. I thought because I was very disciplined, typically I have activity trackers and accountability groups and everything, and a growing business. Like I felt like I'd be able to sit down and write for an hour every morning, do my morning pages, then jump right in. And it never worked that way for me. So I think that would have been a more efficient process than what I did, but I just had random spurts of inspiration. Pressfield talks about the muse. I love Pressfield. Actually, he just wrote a blurb for this book, so I'm really excited to get that out there. Yeah, he's the man. I would just get these random spurts of inspiration, and I'd write huge chunks, and then I'd go back through and I'd edit and I'd polish, and then I'd go a month without writing anything sometimes because the business would take priority or I'd be traveling. I mean, I've had a lot happen in the last couple of years. I just got married. We just bought our house. We went on a honeymoon. We do a lot of traveling. So it's just like, it's been kind of craziness. And so, yeah, it would happen in chunks. So my recommendation would be don't do that. It took longer than it should have. Have a consistent schedule. I mean, literally 1 minute of writing per day is better than 0 minutes a day and then a bulk of activity once every couple of months, which is what I did.
Yeah, I had this very similar thing. Like I get up at 3 o'clock every morning. And so I'm most creative in the morning. So I'm like, okay, well, this is going to be great. Like I'll get up at 3, maybe 2:30, and I'll have like, time before anybody ever gets up to write. Most days I would get up and just stare at myself. Like this thing just would not want to put anything on paper. And the weird things, I was like you, like I'd come screaming out of the sauna. Lori would be like, what are you doing? I'd be like, I got to write. I'm like,
Yeah.
you're supposed to be in the sauna, or I'd be on an airplane and like, I'm, just like, I get this idea, like these weird light bulb moments would happen at the most inopportune times, where I'm writing things on a napkin because I don't even have my access to my journal or my computer. And so I agree with you, like try to be more structured and try to have a system, but you're probably going to get those weird, like epiphanal moments too. And when you get one, be ready and embrace it. Like, doesn't matter where you are. If you get inspiration, take it.
Yes, absolutely. I wrote a huge amount of this book or edited a huge amount, probably both on airplanes for whatever reason. Just you're locked in the seat, you choose not to connect to the Wi-Fi and you just get the work done with no distractions. And you reminded me of one other thing. What was it? I don't remember, but the airplane piece, super important for me.
Yeah. It was the oddities of where I would get those strikes of like, hey, this is a great idea. You can't lose this. You know what I mean? And so anybody who's writing a book or ever wants to, maybe you haven't even thought about it, but maybe you might want to write a book someday. Just start writing stuff down. Like start making like little notes in a journal, and then you'll come back to those notes and be like, oh, that's a great idea. Sometimes that little idea turns into like a chapter, 2 chapters, or something really, sometimes even a whole book. So it can be a really, really cool process. I hate this question, so I'm going to ask it to you. Do you, and I know the first one comes out on November 1st. Do you have plans to write a second one? Like third one, fourth one, fifth? Are you a writer, or did you just write a book? Because I'm not a writer. I'm just the guy who wrote 2 books and might write a third, but I definitely don't want to, but I probably will. If that makes any sense, and you might get that.
I'm not a writer either, but I will also write more books. I have not decided on the second book yet. Pressfield, one of the things that he recommends is the minute that you finish a book, you start writing the next one and you don't take a break until you're at least a third of the way in. That's what he recommends. I can't conceptualize that at all. Yeah. So I'll, in that first book that I read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Kiyosaki, there's a section in the very back that people miss where he's talking to a woman who's putting out a book. And he says something like, it's not a best written book, it's a best selling book. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time selling this book. That's what I'm really excited for. Yeah. Will I write future books? Absolutely. Like I'll probably write a book in my 30s, maybe 2, a book in my 40s, maybe 2. And who knows, maybe by then I'll actually identify as a writer or something like that.
Yeah, someday. Well, man, I love the part you said about selling the book. And we talked about this before I hit record. I mean, that's one of the things is, once you write the book, then it's like, oh crap, now what? And so I want to commit to you, like while on the podcast, that I'll do everything I can to help you get this book out there, help you promote it, help you sell it, do anything that I can be a resource for. Please feel free. I mean, I'll do my part without you asking, but if you need something, I just want to be an open resource for you to, try to get this in as many hands as possible.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, like we've talked about a couple of times, I'm genuinely motivated by the idea that the right book at the right time can change somebody's life. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to amplify the likelihood of that actually happening for people by giving them the tools to close that gap. Like, okay, you have the information. How do you take action?
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, like we've talked about, so many people, they just have a tough time with it.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. You know what? One of my theories is that they think it has to be something grandiose. They think it has to be like moving to a new city or quitting their job or, you know what I mean? Something like profound or epiphanal. And oftentimes it's going to be the smallest little things that you could extract from something that are going to give you the most value. It has been that way for me anyway. And those have led to some like really cool, monstrous things, but it's usually not the monstrous thing that it starts out with.
Yeah, and I love that. One of my other favorite books, so here's a bonus recommendation for everybody, is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And that book says that small steps in the right direction, repeated over a long period of time, will lead to disproportionately positive outcomes, meaning they'll compound on each other.
Yeah.
And so, there's so many different metaphors. I heard it. This was really cool. This guy, Chad Hufford, said this to me the other day. He said, Nick, no matter how many times you read Aesop's fable, The Tortoise and the Hare, the tortoise always wins. Slow and steady will always win the race. And I was like, that's so funny. Just like put it that way, but it just stuck in my head.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like you said earlier, cliches are cliches for a reason.
Yeah,
Right.
they really are.
Well, dude, I appreciate you coming on the show. This has really been cool. I love talking to like-minded people who just want to make an impact, want to make a difference. I love the fact that you started your journey so young and you've got, all this runway ahead of you to just keep crushing it. And you're already kicking out your first book. That's pretty cool. You should be really proud of yourself. And like I said, I'll do anything I can to help you. Before we go, I'm going to put all this in the show notes, but sometimes people just love to hear things. What are the easiest ways for people to find you, find the book, your social? Like, where do you like to hang out?
Instagram is our largest and most interactive community. So if you want to be around some other readers, I recommend checking out Book Thinkers on Instagram. It's spelled just like it sounds, and it'll be in the show notes. And I love offering this, Jay, so I'll offer this today. If anybody wants a personalized book recommendation, just DM me on Instagram. Tell me about the problem you're facing, the skill set that you want to improve. I will probably ask some follow-up questions so that I could get a little bit more specific for you. And then I'll make a recommendation. And I'll try to follow up. Like I try to put this in a spreadsheet and follow up with people over time to see if they've read and implemented the book, just like you had asked about earlier today. So for anybody that's listening, that option is available to you if you just DM at Book Thinkers on Instagram. And then bookthinkers.com, those are kind of the two places to check us out.
Okay, and then we're gonna have some your ability to pre-order this book. That'll be in the show notes. But let's say somebody's listening to this and it's past, it's 3 months after we recorded this and the book's been out for a little while. Where are the best places to go find the book?
Amazon.com is the most universally searchable, but all online book retailers should have the book by then. Barnes and Noble, and it'll be on Audible. I'm reading the book, so if you aren't totally turned away by my voice, then you can check out the audio version as well.
That was gonna be my second question. Are you gonna do the audio version? Let me tell you before we go, like what a bonehead thing I did, and hopefully you're not doing this. So I decided to read my own book, and I'm like, which I love books that are read by the author. So I'm like, I got to do this. I can't have somebody else read it. So I have a buddy that lives in Arizona, and he's written a few books and done the audio. And he's like, hey, come out here. I'll get my audio guy. We'll put you in the booth. We'll do the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, but I want to get it done in this date. And I only had like 48 hours. And so I did the entire thing in one day.
Oof.
It was one, and this sounds, people are going to be like, what was wrong with you? Hard. It was one of the most excruciating things that I've ever done. If you've ever read your own writings, guys, like you have an audio engineer in your ear, you're in like a closet, the padded walls, like in a microphone. I found that I wasn't breathing. By the end of the day, I felt like I was going to pass out. I couldn't eat anything. It was the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. It worked. It ended up being great, but it was one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my life. Like trying to do that in one sitting was just completely stupid.
Yeah, my plan. So I think It's in my calendar. I think next week is the week, but dividing it over 5 days.
Smart.
So I know it will be exhausting each and every day, but it'll be the first thing I do when I have a fresh voice,
Yeah.
and I'll be able to record in chunks.
Yeah, so smart. So I mean, at one point I was in the fetal position in the booth. The audio engineer was like, "Are you in there?" I'm like, "I'm down here. I'm gonna need a minute."
Oh man. Well, at least for this third book that you
Yeah.
don't want to write, but we'll end up writing.
I'll be smarter.
Yes.
We'll chunk it. Dude, thanks again, Nick, for coming on the show, brother. This has been really cool for me. Like I said earlier, like my goal is just to have really cool conversations with awesome people, get to meet new people like you. And about your voice, I don't even know if you know who this is. The entire time you've been talking, there's a guy named, I don't even know what his last name is. His first name's Bob, but he does Bob Does Sports. So look
No,
up Bob.
I'm not familiar. Yeah, I'll check him
Bob
out.
Does Sports on Instagram. He's a comedian, plays a lot of golf and does like things like that. But for some reason, your voice, if I close my eyes, I would think I was talking to Bob. So
Well, at least I don't look like him.
no, you are
up.
definitely way more handsome than he is. Bob, if you're listening to this, sorry, brother, but I mean, you got to call it what it is.
Yeah, I'll check him out.
Yeah, check him out. Just
it looks like a cool account.
Listen to his voice. He's a funny dude. He does like food reviews and like just stupid stuff. But brother, thank you for coming on, man. We'll help you get this book out there, and thank you for writing it.
Thank you.
All right, man. We'll see you soon. Hey, before you go, I'd just like to say thank you again for listening to the Thrive Forever Fit podcast and watching on YouTube. It means the absolute world to me. And if you would do me one favor, and that is simply subscribe and review this podcast on whatever platform it is that you enjoy it on, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, doesn't matter. I would absolutely be so grateful and so thankful if you do that for me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you again next week with an awesome episode. Bye.